16 assistants in a single month. Most of them didn't even make it to lunch before they were crying in the parking lot. The job had a reputation, a curse, people called it, because the man you'd be working for was a paralyzed crime boss with a temper like a lit fuse and a habit of breaking people just to watch them crumble. Nobody lasted a day. Nobody. Until a desperate single mother walked through those doors, took one look at the monster everyone feared, and simply refused to break. Trust me, you're going to want to hear how this one ends. Picture the Hudson Valley in the dead of winter. Frost coating the winding roads, towering pines heavy with snow, and tucked away behind iron gates, a sprawling estate that looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Because that's exactly what it was. Inside those walls lived a man who had once been the undisputed king of the city's underworld. Now he sat in a custom-built wheelchair, a prisoner in his own body. 2 years before our story begins, someone had planted a bomb in his car meant to end his life. It failed at that, but it succeeded at something almost worse. It severed his spine, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down, drowning in constant pain, and absolutely consumed by a bitter, explosive rage that had nowhere to go. His name was Victor, and if his enemies were terrified of him, his staff lived in pure dread. Since the accident, the mansion had become a revolving door of personal assistants. They were usually young, timid, completely unprepared for a man who'd hurl a cup of hot coffee at the wall because it was brewed 2 degrees too cold. None of them lasted. Not one. And then came Juliet. Juliet was 28 years old and a single mother to a 6-year-old boy named Leo, a sweet, anxious kid with severe asthma. She was at the absolute end of her rope, buried under medical debt, staring down an eviction notice, living in a cramped apartment with a son who needed inhalers she could barely afford. Juliet did not have the luxury of being scared off by some rich man's tantrum. She was also a big woman, heavy, full-figured, carrying the physical weight of her life right alongside the emotional weight of it. And the world had a way of making women like her feel invisible, or worse, treating her like an easy punchline. But motherhood, the kind where you fight for your child's survival every single day, had forged her spine out of solid steel. When the temp agency, desperate and out of options, finally sent her to the estate, the recruiter practically begged her over the phone. "If you just make it to 5 o'clock, the woman whispered. "There's a $1,000 bonus in it for you. Please, just survive the day." $1,000. To Juliet, that wasn't bonus money. That was Leo's inhalers. That was groceries. That was keeping a roof over their heads 1 more month. So she took the job. When she arrived at the mansion, the heavy doors were opened by a hulking bodyguard with a scar slashed across his jaw, a man named Bruno. He took one slow look at her worn-out thrift store shoes, her wide hips, the cheap blazer that didn't quite fit right, and he smirked. "You lost, sweetheart," he grunted, leaning against the doorframe. "Kitchen staff comes in around back." Juliet didn't even blink. She just adjusted the battered tote bag on her shoulder. "I'm the new executive assistant, so you can either let me freeze out here on the porch, or you can do your job and take me to Mr. Victor." The smirk slid right off his face. He stepped aside, muttering something under his breath, and led her through the maze of hallways. The air inside was thick and heavy, smelling of expensive cigars and something else underneath it. Fear. She was brought into a massive, dimly lit library. Behind a sprawling oak desk sat the man himself, late 30s, sharp-featured, with cold, hollow eyes that had clearly stopped expecting anything good from the world. The moment she stepped into the room, he didn't even look up from his ledgers. "Get out!" he rasped, his voice like grinding stone. "I haven't even introduced myself," Juliet replied calmly, walking closer. He finally looked up. His eyes dragged over her, dripping with open contempt. "I don't care who you are. You're not cut out for this. You'll be crying in your car in 20 minutes. I asked for a competent assistant, not whatever this is. Get out before I have Bruno throw you out." And to make his point, he violently swept his arm across the desk. A heavy crystal tumbler shattered against the hardwood floor, sending glass flying just inches from her cheap shoes. Silence filled the enormous room. He waited for the tears. He waited for her to run. Instead, Juliet let out a long, exhausted sigh. The exact same sigh she used when her 6-year-old threw his toys against the wall. She walked over to a closet, found a broom and dustpan, and came back to the desk. "I'm fat, Mr. Victor," she said flatly, beginning to sweep up the glass. "Not fragile. And if you think a broken cup is going to scare off a woman who has wrestled a screaming toddler into a snowsuit at 6 in the morning on 3 hours of sleep, you are badly overestimating yourself." He froze. For the first time in 2 years, the man was completely, utterly speechless. "Now," Juliet continued, dumping the glass into a wastebasket and pulling out a notepad, "I need your schedule for the week, the contacts for your physical therapists, and I suggest you use your words next time you're upset. Throwing things is for children." He stared at her, a muscle twitching in his jaw. And then slowly, a dark, dangerous little smirk touched the corner of his mouth. "You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the dumbest." "I'm a mother with rent due," she replied. "What's my first task?" Against every single expectation, Juliet survived the first day. And then she survived the first week. Her presence in that house was an anomaly, something that sent ripples of confusion through the entire organization. Victor was relentless with her. He pushed her to her limits, scheduling meetings on opposite ends of the massive estate just to make her hustle up and down the long corridors. He fired off cruel insults about her weight, her clothes, her background. But Juliet was a fortress. When he mocked her size, she didn't shrink an inch. "If my weight is the most interesting thing you can find to insult, you're losing your edge, boss," she told him one Tuesday, casually reorganizing his confidential files. "Now, do you want to go over the shipping manifests? Or do you want to keep giving me diet tips you read in a magazine?" And slowly, almost without either of them noticing, the dynamic began to shift. His cruelty curdled into something else, a gruff, grudging respect, because here's what he figured out fast. Juliet's mind was razor-sharp, and because everyone around her, the guards, the lieutenants, the associates, all dismissed her as just some fat secretary, they spoke freely in front of her. They never thought twice. And Juliet soaked up every word. She caught a discrepancy in the accounting that saved him $250,000. She brought order to his chaotic life with the same fierce precision she used to run her own. But as the weeks dragged into a brutal, freezing February, Juliet started noticing something that scared her. He was getting worse. On the days he had physical therapy, he was sluggish, his speech slightly slurred, those sharp eyes gone cloudy and dim. The estate's private nurse, a thin, arrogant woman named Clara, brushed it off as just the natural progression of his nerve damage and kept prescribing heavier painkillers. Clara openly couldn't stand Juliet. She'd make snide little comments in the staff kitchen, laughing at Juliet's Tupperware lunches and her clothes. But Juliet ignored all of it. Her focus was on him. Because Juliet had nursed her own grandmother through a long illness before she passed. And Juliet knew exactly what over-sedation looked like. One evening, after the rest of the staff had gone to bed, Juliet stayed late in his private study. She was supposed to be filing, but instead she watched him struggle just to keep his head upright over a chessboard. "You look terrible," she said, never one to mince words. "Always such a charmer," he mumbled, rubbing his temples. "The phantom pain in my legs is worse tonight. Clara gave me my pills an hour ago. Just waiting for them to kick in." Juliet frowned. She walked over to the side table where the little plastic cup sat empty. She remembered the color of the capsules Clara usually gave him, white and blue. But there was a faint powdery residue at the bottom of that cup, and it was distinctly, unmistakably yellow. "Who handles the pharmacy pickups?" she asked, her voice dropping low. "Clara does." "Why?" He blinked, trying to focus on her. "Because I think you're being poisoned." His head snapped up, a flash of the old dangerous man cutting straight through the fog. "Watch your mouth, Juliet. Clara's been with me for a year. And I've been with you for a month, and I'm telling you, someone is slipping you a sedative, she shot back, planting her hands on her hips. You're a sitting duck. You're exhausted. You're compliant. You're not paying attention to anything. So ask yourself, who benefits if you're too weak to run things? Before he could answer, the heavy doors of the study burst open. Bruno rushed in, face pale, gripping a handgun. Boss, he panted, locking the door behind him. We've got a breach. The East Wing alarms just got cut. 3 armed men just came through the outer gate. Victor tried to push himself up, but his arms trembled violently. The drugs were dragging him under. He cursed and slammed a fist against the armrest. I can't see straight. Bruno, get my weapon from the safe. The safe's on a time lock, boss. It's past midnight. Bruno was panicking. Gunfire popped somewhere in the distance, a muffled, terrifying sound echoing through the halls. The rivals had picked tonight specifically. They knew he was helpless. Juliet's heart slammed against her ribs. She thought of Leo, asleep in his bed miles away. She could not die in this house. She refused to leave her son alone in the world. She grabbed the heavy iron fire poker from the fireplace. Bruno. Her voice cut through the panic like a whip. You take the door. Get behind the desk. The wood is thickest there. Victor stared up at his overweight, underpaid assistant, holding a fire poker like a broadsword, her eyes blazing with pure maternal survival instinct. You heard the woman, he growled at Bruno, fighting the weight in his eyelids. Move! The footsteps in the hallway grew louder. They were coming straight for the study. The doors splintered inward with a deafening crash. 2 men in black tactical gear burst in, rifles raised. Bruno didn't hesitate. He fired twice, and the first intruder dropped, but the second lunged forward, returning fire. A bullet grazed Bruno's shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into a glass cabinet. Bruno! Juliet screamed. The remaining attacker swung his rifle toward Victor, still slumped behind the desk, fighting the haze. The man sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. He never saw Juliet coming. Running on pure adrenaline, she stepped out from behind the bookshelf, gripped that heavy iron poker with both hands, raised it like a baseball bat, and brought it down with every ounce of her weight behind it. The iron cracked brutally against the man's kneecap. He shrieked, his leg buckling instantly, his rifle firing harmlessly into the ceiling as he collapsed. Before he could recover, she swung again, the heavy handle connecting with the back of his skull. He crumpled, unconscious. Silence fell, broken only by Bruno's ragged breathing and the ringing in Juliet's ears. She stood over the downed man, chest heaving, the poker trembling in her grip. Victor leaned over his desk, dark eyes wide, the shock burning away the drug haze. He stared at her, this curvy, exhausted single mother who had just taken down a hitman with fireplace equipment. Juliet, he breathed, his voice thick with disbelief. Remind me to never, ever make your son angry. But before they could catch their breath, a third set of footsteps echoed down the hall, moving fast in the opposite direction, toward the rear exit. The alarms! Juliet gasped, dropping the poker. Her mind raced, connecting the dots with the speed of a woman who'd spent years balancing a checkbook down to the last penny. Someone on the inside had to have cut the perimeter. The drugs. The timing. Clara. The nurse. Bruno grunted, clutching his bleeding shoulder. She wouldn't have the guts. She's been poisoning him for weeks, Juliet snapped, her eyes flashing, and she's making a run for it. Without waiting for permission, Juliet sprinted out of the study. She knew this house better than anyone. She'd spent a month organizing every inch of it. She skipped the grand staircase, cut through the servants' corridor, her thrift store shoes squeaking against the marble. She caught Clara in the mudroom near the garage. The nurse was frantically stuffing bundles of cash and 2 leather ledgers into a duffel bag. Going somewhere, Clara? Juliet asked, blocking the exit. Clara jumped, dropping a stack of bills. When she saw it was only Juliet, her panic twisted into an ugly sneer. Get out of my way, you fat cow. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Dominic is taking over tonight. Victor's finished. He's a cripple in a chair. He might be in a chair, Juliet said, stepping forward, squaring her shoulders. "But he's 10 times the man your boss is. And you're just a coward who slips pills into a disabled man's tea." Clara pulled a small silver revolver from her coat pocket, aiming it right at Juliet's chest. "I said move. Your weight might stop a lot of things, sweetie. It won't stop a bullet." Juliet looked at the gun, and she thought of me. She thought of the hospital bills, the eviction notices, all the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, feeling completely powerless against a world that never gave her a break. And she was done feeling powerless. "You've got the safety catch wrong." Juliet bluffed smoothly, her voice flat. Clara instinctively glanced down at the gun. A split second. But it was all Juliet needed. With astonishing speed for her size, she lunged. She didn't punch. She didn't kick. She just used physics, throwing her entire weight against the smaller woman. They crashed to the tile, the revolver skittering away under a bench. Clara screamed, thrashing and clawing, but she was pinned, trapped beneath Juliet's solid frame. Juliet held the nurse's arms down with her knees and glared at her with the unyielding wrath of a mother pushed to the absolute brink. "I might be heavy," she hissed, "but at least I'm not cheap." 10 minutes later, the estate was swarming with Victor's loyal men. Bruno, his arm bandaged, wheeled the boss into the mudroom, where Juliet was casually sitting on top of a weeping Clara, waiting. Victor took in the stolen ledgers, the scattered cash, the terrified traitor pinned beneath his assistant, whose cheap blazer was torn and whose hair had become a frizzy halo around her face. And then, to everyone's absolute shock, he threw his head back and laughed. A deep, booming sound that rolled through the halls. A sound that House hadn't heard in 2 years. "Bruno," he chuckled, wiping a tear from his eye. "Double her salary." The cleanup was swift, quiet, and ruthless. The takeover attempt collapsed the moment his trusted men realized their boss was no longer being slowly poisoned into helplessness. Once the sedatives cleared his system, the old version of him came roaring back with a vengeance. Within 48 hours, the rival operation was dismantled, and the city quietly understood that he was back in absolute control. But inside those fortified walls, the real shift in power had nothing to do with crime families. It had everything to do with Juliet. The morning after the attack, the air still faintly smelled of bleach. He summoned her to the sunroom, where harsh winter light poured through the windows, lighting up his sharp features, and the hollow, deadened look in his eyes. It was gone. In its place was a burning, intense clarity. "Sit," he commanded, pointing to a velvet armchair across from him. Juliet, bruised and running on nothing but adrenaline and cheap instant coffee, sank into the chair with a heavy sigh. "If you're going to fire me for assaulting your nurse and ruining the mudroom floor, I'm going to need a severance package. Leo needs a new nebulizer, and my landlord is threatening eviction again." He stared at her for a long, unblinking moment. "I ran a background check on you last night," he said. "A full one." Juliet stiffened, her defensiveness flaring. "Excuse me, that's a massive invasion of privacy. You had no right to look into my son. You live in a dangerous, crumbling building. You're drowning in debt from Leo's hospital visits. You eat instant noodles for lunch in the break room so he can have fresh strawberries at dinner." He listed it off, but his voice had lost its usual sharp edge. It was gentle, unsettlingly so. He reached into his blazer and slid a thick manila envelope across the table. "The debt is gone. The medical bills are paid. The landlord has been dealt with, permanently." Juliet stared at that envelope, her heart stopping. Her hands trembled as she reached toward it. "Mr. Victor, I can't accept this." "You saved my life, Juliet," he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You saved everything I built. But more than that, you woke me up. I spent 2 years wallowing in self-pity, punishing everyone around me because I lost the use of my legs. And you walked in here carrying the weight of the entire world on your shoulders, and you didn't flinch. You didn't pity me." He wheeled himself closer until he stopped, just inches from her knees. "I don't want you living out there anymore. It's not safe. Some of the men who attacked us might have seen your face, and I protect what's mine. There's a guest house on the east lawn. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, a garden, a security detail. I want you and Leo moved in by the weekend." Juliet swallowed hard, the relief finally cracking her stoic mask as tears stung her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" "Because," he said softly, reaching out to gently touch her bruised knuckles, his thumb grazing her skin. "I need you to stay." Moving into the estate changed everything. Leo, a shy boy with big, anxious eyes, was terrified at first of the looming mansion and the armed guards. But Victor did something nobody who knew him would have believed. He dismantled his own terrifying reputation, brick by brick, for the sake of a 6-year-old. The ruthless crime boss installed a custom ramp in the Grand Library, not for his own wheelchair, but so he could race remote-control cars with Leo across the polished floors. He hired the best pediatric lung specialist in the state and put the doctor on a fat retainer to visit the estate every single week. And when Leo handed him a messy crayon drawing of a wheelchair with flames shooting off the wheels, Victor had it framed in solid silver and set it on his desk, right next to his ledgers and a loaded gun. As the brutal winter thawed into a tentative spring, the bond between Victor and Juliet grew into something undeniable. She was no longer just an assistant. She was his closest confidant. She ran the legitimate side of the business with ruthless efficiency, her sharp mind catching financial errors that even his seasoned accountants missed. But money can't instantly erase a lifetime of being made to feel small. One evening in late May, Victor threw a lavish private gala for his highest-ranking associates, celebrating a record-breaking quarter. Juliet attended in a flowing emerald green silk gown he'd secretly had custom-tailored to her exact measurements. And despite the stunning dress and flawless makeup, she felt horribly exposed. Surrounded by the impossibly thin, surgically perfect wives of his associates, all her old demons came creeping right back. She stood near the champagne fountain, painfully aware of the space she took up. And then she caught the whispers from a cluster of women nearby. "Look at her arms. Why does the boss keep her around? I heard she used to be a temp. She looks more like a bouncer than a date. He must just be keeping her out of pity." The familiar sting of a lifetime of mockery burned in her throat. Humiliated, she slipped away from the glittering ballroom and retreated into the quiet, humid sanctuary of the estate's conservatory, hiding among the towering ferns. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, fighting back tears, feeling like a fraud in a world she didn't belong in. A few minutes later, the soft hum of electric wheels announced his arrival. He navigated his chair through the foliage, his jaw clenched, his face set in a murderous scowl. "I threw them out," he announced bluntly. Juliet wiped her eyes quickly. "Threw who out?" "Silvio, his wife, and the rest of their shallow little entourage. I told him if his wife ever disrespects my right hand again, I'll strip him of everything he has." "Victor, no," she gasped, turning to him. "You can't alienate your best people over petty gossip. They're right anyway. I don't fit in with them. I stick out like a sore thumb." "Good," he growled, wheeling closer until he could take her hands. "I don't want you to fit in with them. They're hollow parasites. You are real." "I'm fat, Victor," she whispered, her voice breaking as she finally said out loud the thing that had haunted her whole life. "I'm a heavy, exhausted mother with stretch marks and a cheap background. I'm not what men like you show off." He looked up at her, his dark eyes blazing with an intensity that stole her breath. He gently pulled her closer by the hands until she was standing between his knees, the emerald silk pooling around his chair. "Juliet, look at me." His voice was a low rumble. She met his gaze, her heart pounding. "For 2 years, I despised my own body. I hated that it was broken. I hated that it couldn't do what it used to. I felt like half a man. But when I look at you, I don't see flaws. I see a body that has fought tooth and nail to survive. I see the softness that kept a sick child warm and safe when you had nothing. I see the strength that stepped between me and a bullet without a second of hesitation. Your body is proof of your power. It's magnificent and it's perfect." He reached up, his calloused fingers tracing the curve of her hip with reverence, like she was a priceless work of art. "You are the most beautiful, formidable woman I have ever known. You're my equal in every way, and I am completely at your mercy." Juliet's breath caught. For the first time in her 28 years, she wasn't being fetishized in secret, and she wasn't being insulted in public. She was being truly, completely seen. She leaned down and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was explosive. A collision of two unbreakable people holding all the tension of the last 4 months. The fear, the survival, the quiet nights working by lamplight, the shared laughter over Leo's antics. His strong arms wrapped around her waist and pulled her flush against him, grounding her in a way she had never felt before in her life. By the time the leaves turned gold the following autumn, the organization was unrecognizable, stronger, wealthier, untouchable. And at the center of it all sat Victor, ruling from his chair with cold, calculated precision. But everyone in that world, from the street soldiers to the international suppliers, knew the real law of the land. Rule 1, you do not steal from the boss. Rule 2, you do not cross the boss's borders. And Rule 3, the one that mattered most of all, you never, under any circumstances, show disrespect to the boss's queen or her son. She was no longer the broke temp worker begging for a daily bonus just to survive. She was draped in custom silk that hugged every glorious curve. She managed multi-million-dollar portfolios, stared down the most dangerous men in the city without blinking, and was always home in time to read Leo his bedtime stories. She had walked into a job everyone called cursed to face a man who tried his hardest to break her. Instead, she broke down every wall he'd built, saved his entire empire, and claimed a throne of her very own. No assistant had ever lasted a single day working for that man. But then, Juliet was never just an assistant. She was a mother, a survivor, and the undisputed love of his life. So here's what I keep coming back to. We're told that strength looks a certain way, that power comes in a certain size, a certain shape, a certain package. And then a woman like Juliet walks in, the kind of person the world spent her whole life overlooking, and she proves every single doubter dead wrong. She didn't change who she was to win. She won by being exactly who she always was. And there's something powerful in that, isn't there? What do you think was the real turning point for her? Was it the moment she swept up that broken glass and refused to flinch? Was it the night she swung that fire poker and saved his life? Or was it the conversation in the conservatory, when she finally let herself be truly seen? I genuinely want to know, so drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one, and if Juliet's story moved you, if her fierce heart and her unbreakable spirit hit you somewhere real, then do me a favor and hit that like button. It honestly helps more than you know. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that their worth was never up for debate. And subscribe so you never miss the next story, because I've got plenty more where this came from. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember, real strength was never about the size of the package. It was always about the size of the fight inside you.